Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're going to give just a few more minutes to let other folks join, and we'll get started here shortly.
Right. Yep.
Well, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started here, and we are recording this, and we'll send it out in our weekly email for those who weren't able to join us today. But thank you very much for joining us for our latest edition of H2-Know. Today, we're excited to have two speakers. First, Chanel T. Walt, the director of the Idaho Department of Ag, to give us an update on the Quagga mussel issue. You recall we had a lot of discussion about this last year, and some updates that the Department of Ag has. And then after Chanel, Kendra Kaiser with Boise State University does a lot of research and a lot of projects relating to water in Idaho, and is here to specifically talk to us a little bit about a project they've got going on in the Wood River Valley. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you to the Education Committee for helping us to put this together. And Chanel, we'll turn the time over to you.
All right. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
Perfect.
All right. Thumbs up. Okay. So I'm going to quickly go through some of what happened during the legislative session related to Quagga, and then jump into what everyone can kind of expect for the 2024 season from us, and then leave lots of time for questions. And I told Paul and the team, if you have concerns or even salty questions, don't hesitate to bring them up. That never bothers me. It's better to get it out there than to pretend like there aren't any questions about things. And we have been moving fast. So quick note on the legislative session, two things of note. Number one is some historic investments in our budget. You know that the governor had a very, very good budget in terms of agriculture, and that included $6.6 million request for quagga mussel response on the mid-snake especially, but really applies to the whole state. So that $6.6 million was approved by the legislature, and that will be a huge increase in what this agency is able to do in terms of quagga. So specifically, we're going to be opening 3 new stations from what we've had in the past. One of those stations will be right there at Centennial Park in the Mid-Snake in Twin Falls. The next one will be at Shoshone Falls, really concentrated again on the Mid-Snake where we know we had quagga mussels. And then the third station is going to be probably in that greater impact area, so we can try to deal with some choke points as they relate to out-of-state voters or something like that. But that third station is not yet determined. It's going to be where we can get the most bang for our buck. But 2 of those stations, we know where they need to go for sure. Also includes 18 new temps. We're going to need a lot of people to get this work done. 2 new full-time employees. Allows us to double our monitoring, make some critical infrastructure investments in stations, in boats, in sampling equipment, everything that we need to really respond statewide, not just on the Mid-Snake. The second piece of the legislative session that was really important, and especially for your members, Paul, is the legislation that really targets out-of-state boat traffic. And so we have, well, I'll rewind and say in 2008, Idaho passed the Invasive Species Act. And that really started this entire process of boat check stations and looking for quagga and zebra mussels and these aquatic species that were really concerning. We've had a great program for 15 years, but this new legislation, I think, is keeping us at the forefront of having the right pieces and tools in place. So when dealing with out-of-state boat traffic, it is now a requirement. If you're coming to Idaho from out of state, you have to have an inspection with us before you launch. So it's not just if you pass a station, you have to have an inspection. You have to have proof of an inspection before you launch on Idaho waters, which is really good that it's not just folks who are bypassing a station. That's gonna require a really hand in glove relationship with us and law enforcement for them to understand if you observe anyone launching on Idaho waters and they haven't been inspected, that is something that they can be cited for. The next part of the legislation is what we would call pull the plug. So any boat or any watercraft in the state that where you can pull a drain plug has to be pulled before they leave that water body. So you're not going to be going from one water body to the next, even within the state, with that, ballast tank full or whatever the case may be. So pull the plug, requirement for all watercraft in the state. And then a little bit on enforcement as well, but something else that's important is county partnership. So the new legislation also includes language that ISTA will make available up to 20% every year of the invasive species sticker fund for counties, and that can be a partnership. So if there's a county out there that is really, really keen to have an inspection station set up in their area, we know that there's a lot of them out there, but what we need is a partnership. We have located our stations that we fully fund in the places where we're going to get the most boats, the most traffic, the most bang for our buck. But there are other water bodies out there that are concerned. And so what that allows us to do is say, we'll buy all the equipment if you can help man it. And so it's a good partnership for both. But it applies, we try to be really inclusive in the language. So it's not just counties or cities. It's really, it could, water districts, it can be anybody, really except private probably is a good way to say it. And even private is probably something we could talk about a little bit. So up to 20% of that fund is available. That's kind of a legislative recap. I'm going to go straight into updates on the mid-snake because I think that's really relevant for your folks still. And then we'll take some questions at the end. But I was actually down on the mid-snake, not last week, but the week before for a couple of days. We were on the water with Fish and Game. I was down with the county commissioners, with law enforcement folks. I'm going to cut to the chase and tell you water is still too cold for us to sample and to know how successful we were last fall. So you've heard us say, I think many, many times we have to wait for water to warm up. If we sampled right now, we'd get a false positive. Everything looks good if mussels aren't reproducing. So it's still too cold. And as you guys know, flows are pretty high right now. So water is moving and it is a little bit cold. So we're going to wait on that. But we had actually opened up Centennial Park and Centennial up to Pillar Falls throughout the winter. So our intent was to get boaters back on the water as soon as we could, while still providing for a lot of protection. We never run watercraft inspection stations over winter. We did this year. And that allowed us to get hunters back into an area that they really, really love, but while mitigating the threat. So every boat and kayak and everything going into Centennial is still getting a hot wash from us. That is just a measure of precaution. And we are really cognizant that just because you're at Centennial today doesn't mean you're at another water body tomorrow. And so everything's getting washed out of an abundance of caution. The Shoshone pool. So you guys remember we're talking about 3 pools. The Pillar Falls pool, go up river, the Shoshone Falls pool, and go up river once more to the Twin Falls pool. So Twin Falls Dam, each of those areas of the river. The Shoshone pool and the Twin Falls pool are still closed. And if we need to send a map, I can drop a link in here to guys if you need it. In fact, I'll do that in just a second here. So you can see all the portions. But Shoshone Falls and Twin Falls are still closed to all watercraft for any reason. So that water is not open. We are not having folks up in that part of the river just because we would really like to get some test results before we open the river. Again, that's taking some negotiating. I know folks want life back to normal down there, but there is still a lot of risk, and we don't want all the hard work that we did last fall to mean nothing because we messed up the end game. But the intent is to get it open. We are doing a ton of work to get Centennial ready for the type of traffic that we expect. You guys in the Magic Valley know Centennial Park is being loved to death. It is a high density, high traffic area. And so we are going to be running not probably one station down there, but really one station with 3 lanes of traffic, a pretty heavy law enforcement presence. That station is a wash in and wash out station, because again, we don't want to be messing up the end game by having someone from out of state. They need to wash in before they go into that area. it's going to be a pretty intense effort in Centennial Park to get boats and kayaks and watercraft clean. But we know that there is a lot of really, really precious water in the greater area of the Mid-Snake, and that is something we're very, very mindful of. And irrigators throughout this whole process have been the absolute best to work with, and we know how much is on the line for all of you. So we're trying to get this right. We're going to have a good partnership with law enforcement. We're actually going to help pay and offset some of the costs of law enforcement to help us enforce at Centennial Park on the Mid-Snake. That won't apply to all water bodies. Again, if it's a water body owned by a particular, canal company, that's going to be a different story. But we are going to work with law enforcement on the Mid-Snake to have a presence down there and make sure folks are doing things the right way. Transitioning away from the snake just a little bit. Part of the budget investment we got from the legislature is to double monitoring in the state. So folks don't realize that we do about 1,400 to 1,600 samples a year in sampling all across the state, looking for mussels and aquatic species of concern. We are going to double what we normally would do. So that isn't just in the Magic Valley, it's going to be all over the state. So if there's anyone interested or concerned, have we been in your area? When were you last here? We have a really transparent website that shows you when we were there, what we found, who sampled. All of that data is available and easy to get to if you want it. But more importantly, I mean, it's just the promise from us that we know that we need to be out on every water body we can get to as often as possible, so folks have a good sense of what's happening. A specific update, and there might be more of these, Paul, and you can kind of help me direct traffic on this, but I know we had heard from some specific folks on, like we had a question about Oakley. If we had an issue in a particular water body, would ISDA respond? Would you bring the full presence of what you did on the Mid-Snake to our water body? The answer is always yes. We will always respond. I think the thing I would say about that is all of us are doing everything we can so we don't have another episode of the Mid-Snake. We don't want to ever have to do that again. But we certainly would, and there are lots of tools, there is lots of budget, there are lots of people, there are lots of things in place that we can deal with emergencies quite quickly. I think we showed that last year when we did something in 2 weeks that it took other states 6 months to do. But we're very much hoping that we never have to repeat what we did on the Mid-Snake. But if there's any specific concerns, please talk to Paul, talk to us directly. We would be happy to come down to visit with you, to visit with members. If folks just need to see someone face to face, or you need us at an evening meeting or something like that, please don't hesitate to ask us to do that, because we don't always want to insert ourselves into something. But if there are critical questions that need answered, we are happy to get there. And then the last thing I'll mention is a new communication campaign coming from us, because it is so essential that we get to, especially out-of-state voters. Tourism is a huge industry from Idaho. We're not going to stop folks from coming here, but what we need them to do is share the same land ethos or water ethos that we have, which is just because you came from Colorado or Arizona where you already have this problem doesn't mean it's not a concern for us. So we have a massive communication campaign that's going to be rolled out really probably starting in the next week or two. We're working with Drake Cooper, we've worked with in the past, but we are doing heads and tails more than we've ever done. So there will be TV commercials, there will be radio ads, there'll be social media. We'll be working with a bunch of people on social media. We're going to have banners at gas stations. We're going to have billboards. We're going to get to all the boating equipment stores. I mean, we're going to have communication in every possible venue that we hope we can get it, which is to say there's two things. Number one, we need to be extra mindful of the Mid-Snake and what happened here and what that means for folks going forward and the level of vigilance we have to have. But it's also a statewide message that we want to preserve all of the rest of Idaho exactly as it is and make sure that we don't have this problem. Make sure people are aware of the requirements that they're going to have. If you want to come enjoy Idaho waters, great. Here's what's going to be required of you to do that. And to be very aware of what we expect when folks come here. So those, I think, are the majority of the updates as they're going. If there's any, I mean, there's lots of levels of detail to this. We have stations around the state that have already opened and have been running. We're working through We have early contracts with those station operators and all the cooperators that we work with across the state. And some of those are being amended, after legislation passed, after the budget passed, to make sure that we're getting all those tools deployed. But things are moving all over the state. So I'll pause for a little bit, see if there's questions or concerns.
If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. While they're thinking, maybe I'll ask, for me, the questions I get the most are, one, what's the update, which you've provided, and then two, from folks in other areas saying, what's going on in my area as far as testing and stuff. And you answered that question, but you talked about the interactive map, is that just on the ISDA webpage? Where might we find that?
Yeah, how about I'll share the link here. But we
Perfect.
can share it more regularly. In fact, I'll do it right now so you can see where we've been. Make sure I can copy this. And but I would encourage folks to come and look throughout the season. So we're going to be out and about all of the time. And again, with us doubling monitoring, I would anticipate this to look different every single month. And just kind of a note about monitoring, this is the internal ISDA driven monitoring that we have done for 15, 16 years is how we initially found the problem on the Snake River. And it is a credit to our staff. If you guys have ever, in late summer, portaged in over Pillar Falls into the Shoshone Pool, it is not easy to get to. You have to be pretty determined to want to get a kayak in there. And it is a testament to one of our staff members who, instead of sampling at Centennial Park, where it's kind of easy to get into and it's just a quick trip, she did it the hard way because that's what she needed in terms of getting good samples. And she portaged in to Shoshone Falls and did transects of the river on a kayak by herself. And so those are the kind of sampling events that we're talking about, not just in the easy places, but truly in the places where it matters. I mean, we had folks last fall out in Cauldron Lynn, which, as you guys know, is not exactly a place where I'd want to be sampling. But we try to get our staff all over the place, and we'll get that link shared.
And how many times in a year, for example, is a particular location tested?
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend on where we're talking about. So we might, and if you guys can zoom in on that, there's some different versions of that map that you can get to. I might try to send you a little bit better one, Paul, because if you can blow up the GIS map bigger into a separate link, but let me get you a little bit better one to share.
Okay, I was gonna just share a screen, but if you're gonna get us a better one, then I'll.
Yeah, we do have a really good one, but you can also type in your address and see how close we've been to you and when we were there last. So that's an easy way to get it dialed in just a little bit more. But in terms of questions about how often we're there, it may not be the exact same location every time. So a good example, we might be at Auger Falls in Twin, and then we're up in the Shoshone Pool. So we're not talking about a ton of distance, but two very different sampling events for us that we would consider. But I think if you were talking about, it's two sampling events in the Mid-Snake. So that's pretty similar for most water bodies where it's going to look like something on a continuum.
I will share this really quick if I can. Where did it go? Exit it. Oh, I closed it. Never mind. Never mind. Here I am acting like I'm 400 years old working Zoom for the first time. We will send this link out. There we go. Never mind. Here we go. Sorry about that.
Well, I'm glad you're running it because I'm not capable.
So here's the link that's in the comments there, and if you click here, view full screen, then you can go and you kind of see around the state where they've done their monitoring. Up here, you can add your address. So if we go, for example, let's go over here near Grandview. There was a test there conducted, although some of them have, there we go. No quagga mussels detected, so you can kind of get a sense where.
And you guys can kind of get a sense of the season too, where that's a lot of 2023 data because we're not, I mean, we get
Yeah.
out pretty early, it depends on where, but you will see this really start to light up quite a bit for the 2024 season. But you can get a really good, pretty real-time update on this. And then if you're curious too, we have something similar for watercraft inspection stations as well, and I'm gonna share that with everybody. Let me get that sent. So if you would like real-time data on how many watercraft we have inspected in the state and where they've been, you can see it on our dashboard. So that's the second link that I sent you. And it breaks it down by the station. So whether it was Bruno or Cottrell or which station, how many boats had to be turned back by law enforcement, how many, boats we've hot washed, how many foul boats we had, that's all on there as well. And so you can see that we definitely have stations open now. If you go on here, you're gonna see Centennial Park has already been very busy. I think we've gotten through 350 watercraft just in the last little bit.
So this is that you can see. Interesting.
And this is pretty real time. It gets updated at least daily.
All right, let me see here. Any other questions? Well, I'm not seeing any. I just will reiterate what we've said time and again. Really appreciate your team. I know that there's a whole lot of hands and a whole lot of minds working on this, but appreciate your team leading the way in our state's response. It doesn't go unnoticed. It is very appreciated, especially in this group. I think I mentioned when I got that first call from Lloyd, and then I would call a few folks and let them know. I mean, it was just silence and sometimes a swear word or two, because it's something we take very, very seriously. So very much appreciated to you and your team and the vast other folks who are also helping out on this, but very appreciated.
I think the response that you talked about was the same response I had when I found out, but
Yeah.
Paul, I can't thank you enough for you, for all your members, for the irrigators across the state. I mean, the whole reason we do all of this is because of ag. I mean, obviously I care about recreation too, but I always care about ag first and foremost. And if we're not getting it right on behalf of agriculture, I want to hear about that. That is really the driving force in all this. You guys have been the most tremendous supporters, and helped us explain why there is gravity to this, why it's important, why we're doing it. And so if there's anything that your folks need, and I just make that standing note of thanks, and please let us know if you need us to get to an evening meeting at one of the districts, if you need us at one of the, if it's, we can always do virtual, but we are happy to come in person if folks just want to see somebody and get a sense of what's going on and sense of comfort from things. We are happy to do that, so please let us know.
Appreciate it. Well, not seeing any other, thank you very much, Chanel, for your time. We know you're busy and got lots of things to do, but we appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. And we will then transition over to Kendra. Again, Kendra is with Boise State University, really very active in water study, water research projects. She's a mainstay at meetings over here in the Treasure Valley, just talking about the new and exciting research projects that she and her team of students at times are doing. So, and today coming to talk to us a little bit about a project they've got going on in the Wood River Valley. So Kendra, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone for joining. I am going to be a classic academic, and I'm going to share my screen and have a presentation for you all. All right. Are you able to see that? Okay, great. Yeah, so today I just wanted to share with all of you this project that's been going on in the Big Wood River Valley probably for about 3 or 4 years now. And it started as a really small effort, and it's grown over time, including having some federal funding, which is really exciting. And so I hope today both to tell you about the process and the history of how we got to where we are now with this project, some of the deliverables that we've created with the stakeholders in the Valley. That way you all can kind of see some of the types of things that we can provide to other basins. Think about if some of these resources might be useful for you where you are. The primary funding that I'll mention to you that supported this, we're going to be writing another grant next year. And so this will be a great time over this, next 6 to 9 months to be in touch if expanding this into your region is something of interest. So I work here at Boise State in the Department of Geosciences on this project. I also have a colleague, Sam Carlson, who's with Montana State University. And then we've been working with Zach Hill and the Ecosystem Sciences Foundation on implementing this project. But first, I'll give you a little background of how we ended up here. So originally, this work was funded by the Wood River Water Collaborative. And they had gotten, it's kind of interesting, but Trout Unlimited has supported a lot of communities across the West and probably across the country in creating collaboratives like the Wood River Collaborative through the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart Grant program. And so this grant program really allows people to come together, identify community needs, and create objectives for things that they want to see implemented. And so that work led to the Wood River Water Collaborative. The collaborative said, we need more tools for forecasting stream flow in the basin. And from that, they gave me a small seed grant. And with that seed grant, I developed some initial modeling tools. And then I partnered up with my colleagues, Sam and Zach, and we submitted a project to the USDA through their Agricultural Food Research Initiative. And that is what has funded the real meat of the work and implementation of some of those initial ideas into something that's quite a bit more tangible. And so, like I mentioned, that project was one of their smaller grant programs, but they have a kind of a pathway for researchers. So it's like once you've developed an initial idea through the program that funded this project, you can get even more funding in the future if you find ways to expand the work. So what our goal was with the USDA funding was to make water data and water forecasting tools more accessible and useful for folks in the Wood River Valley. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Valley, we have the Big Wood River that's coming down from the north. Once it hits about Bellevue, you hit the Bellevue Triangle, and the river actually goes dry for a couple of mile stretch. And that dry stretch, there is both an irrigation canal that goes alongside it, as well as irrigation canals that distribute irrigation water across the Bellevue Triangle. The other interesting thing about this system is that we have Silver Creek, which is a renowned trout fishery. And Silver Creek is interesting in that technically it's in the Littlewood drainage, which is right next door. But the headwaters of Silver Creek come from these springs that are largely, the flow in those springs is largely driven by the groundwater in the Bellevue Triangle. So Silver Creek is kind of a reflection of the hydrology of both the Big Wood and the irrigation practices in the valley. And then the Big Wood then goes into Magic Reservoir, and then there's a bunch more water users downstream. For the purposes of this project, we really focus above the reservoir. So we also include Camas Creek in some of our predictive tools, but we have not yet expanded down below the reservoir. So the specific objectives for this project, number one was to collaborate with stakeholders in the basin to really hear what people need. We wanted to improve forecasts of both water availability and water rights. Forecasting some water rights curtailment dates was something of interest from that initial support from the Water Collaborative. And then we also extended those initial goals and wanted to include models of stream health in Silver Creek as a function of some of the concerns that have come up in low water years about temperatures in the fishery. And then in general, we just wanted to, like I mentioned before, improve access to information and facilitate database decisions via an online interface, which I am excited to share with you today. So some of the big picture workflow and timeline, this project will go through the end of this year. We've had about 3 stakeholder meetings at important junctures of the project. And the first step that we had was to just improve the Big Wood and Silver Creek forecasting models. And so since the initial models were developed, I'd say on a dime, it was really great opportunity to use this funding to expand what we could do. And the big lift there was including some remote sensing data about snow. The second step was to create a stream temperature and dissolved oxygen model for Silver Creek. And so we have the stream temperature model that I'll show you today, and the dissolved oxygen model is still in progress. And then the third component is developing an online interface with interactive tools and data visualization, which we're really excited. We have them up and running, and we are still actively getting feedback and updating those with the input from our stakeholders. And then at the end, we're going to have some additional guidance on how to use the interface to our stakeholders once we really tied a bow on it and continue on to think about other places that we could do this work. So first off, I just wanted to kind of give a reminder of the different types of hydrologic models that we can think about when we're thinking about streamflow forecasting. So one are physically based models. So physically based models are a representation of the actual processes that move water through the system. And so you could think about including equations that have gravity incorporated in them, or very specific details about porosity and other subsurface characteristics. And so the real utility of these type of models is that they retain the accuracy of how water moves through the system, even as inputs or other components of the system changes. The real challenge here is that these are really time and resource consuming to develop, calibrate, and run. So our classic physical model that we can all be really familiar with here in Idaho is ModFlow. That's the model that both the USGS and the Department of Water Resources use to model subsurface flow. Some other physical models that some of you may be familiar with are from the Northwest River Forecasting Center, and I'll show some of those later as well. And then on the other hand, we have statistical models. So these statistical models are based on trends and patterns in a given data set. And so the real utility here is that they can be developed really efficiently and they can run really efficiently, much more so than physical models. But the challenge with these types of models is that they're not as robust to events that are outside of the historical record. So for example, in 2017, when we had our big rain on snow event and there were high flows that year, those type of inputs are not as strongly represented with statistical models. So we have to be a little bit careful as conditions extend beyond our observations in the past. And the NRCS forecasts of streamflow and irrigation season volume are a statistical model. So the existing tools that we have in the Valley and largely in the region are both from the Northwest River Forecasting Center. And so that's a physically based model. That one has daily predictions at Haley. The thing that's really great about their model is that they use a 10-day weather forecast. And then beyond the 10-day weather forecast, they look at all of the historical weather patterns that have come through a given area, and they run each of those through their physically based model. And so they call them traces. And so you have both your 10-day forecast plus a lot of different iterations of types of weather that could come through the system. So the NRCS, on the other hand, is a statistical model. It's just using observations of existing data. They have a monthly forecast at both Haley and now Camas Creek. I don't think the Camas Creek one is getting updated as often. The great thing is that those monthly forecasts are now available online regularly. Historically, they hadn't been. And then here, the models that we've developed are the Big Wood modeling suite. It's also a statistical model in a similar vein to NRCS. We predict summer stream flow from April 1 to October 1 at Haley, Stanton Crossing, Camas Creek, and Silver Creek. And these predictions can be updated daily from February 1 through the end of April. And then we also have some predictions of the day of allocation for water rights in the Valley. So the big improvement here is adding in Stanton Crossing, Silver Creek, and Camas Creek. And Silver Creek was the big hitter that a lot of irrigators in the Valley were interested in. The other component is that the predictions are updated daily, unlike the NRCS model, and then also the water rights information. So I'm going to go over the methods pretty quickly just to have the information in the presentation, but I won't dwell on them for too long. The big workflow that we think about for Streamflow forecasting is that we go out and we look at all the data that we need, and we harmonize. We put it all into one database and we harmonize it so that it's really efficient for us to access all of that data. It's a really important component to any of these type of modeling efforts, particularly if you want results to be updated daily. From there, we then use a couple of different statistical models and an approach for evaluating the timing of the water running off. We call it an analog water year approach. This is a method that Rob Van Kirk developed over in Henry's Fork, and we implement it here. And then we also have the curtailment model. We get all of these things together, and the outcome is streamflow volume forecast, approximate timing of runoff, and then some anticipated curtailment dates. So the data sources that we are using in here are both USGS data. So we look at historical annual irrigation season volume. We look at winter base flow. Winter base flow is effectively a surface representation of how the groundwater aquifer is doing. So it's like our best way to capture what's going on in the aquifer without having to incorporate, just a few groundwater wells that are in the basin. Although we are looking at groundwater data that is available and considering how we might incorporate that. We also have the SNOTEL data set that is across the basin. So there's about 12 sites. That data comes in hourly. That provides us snow water equivalent and temperature. The temperature has turned into a really important model or variable in our models, both primarily air temperature. And then we have SNODAS, which is the remote sensing data set. That data is updated daily. So it uses both observations and a model to predict the snow covered extent, SWE, and precipitation. The thing that I really want to hit on about SNODAS is that when we first did the very initial versions of this modeling, we didn't have enough funding to invest the time in getting SNODAS to work. But we heard over and over again from our stakeholder meetings that folks were really interested in having snow-covered extent in the model, because particularly when you think about Camas Creek, there's a lot of low elevation areas that can be covered with snow that aren't necessarily captured by the SNOTEL network. And so we took that input from stakeholders really seriously and were able to incorporate it in this version of the model, which is exciting, not only because we did find that some of those variables that folks on the ground saw as being important, being incorporated into the models, and also now that we have the workflow developed, we can easily take that workflow and implement it in other places. So it's a one-time investment for being able to have access to that data into the future more easily. And then we also use 2 agromet sites, one in Fairfield and one in Peekaboo. Those low elevation temperatures and data sets are also really important for us to think about when we're modeling irrigation season volumes. So I'm going to give you like a quick glance of some of the results. These 2 figures are showing observed irrigation season acre feet versus predicted irrigation season volume. On the left, we have Bigwood at Haley, and on the right, we have Silver Creek. These are both showing the modeled versus predicted values for the models in April. So the way our model works is that we have different models in February, March, and April, because the variables that go into those predictions kind of change during different times of the winter season. The first couple of things that you can take away, these models are really strong, stronger than we would expect, which is exciting. And also, it gives us it makes it really important for us to understand any of the uncertainties that come out of the model, which I'll talk about a little bit later. One other thing that you can see in the figure on the left from Bigwood at Haley is that over on the high end, so when we're hitting an observed seasonal flow of 600 calf, the model does pretty poorly. And so this is really important because these models perform really well on the low end. So the years when things are dry, which is great because that's when we really need to know this information. These models are never going to be good at predicting flood events and high flow years. That's when those physically based models like the Northwest River Forecasting Center's Those models are much stronger when we think about really wet conditions. So what does the output from the model look like? On the left, we have a box plot of, in the blue, of all of the historical irrigation season volume in Silver Creek. And on the right are predictions for this year. And you can just see a couple of different colors that correlate with a couple of different important values that I'll talk about in a little bit. But here, the real goal is to say, historically, flows in Silver Creek go from anywhere from 30 to 65 calf. And our model is predicting that we're going to be just above average this year, and our uncertainty is pretty low, which is, you can see that box plot's really narrow. It's not nearly as big as that historical average. So it's giving us more information than we would get from just assuming an average condition. And then on the right, we're showing a simulated stream flow for the season. So this figure is kind of interesting because unlike the Northwest River Forecasting Center, where they're taking today's conditions and the weather forecast and the potential outcomes, and they run it all through the physically based model, this is a simulation where we take all of the historical pattern of flow going through the system, and we scale them based on the volume that we see on that box plot on the left. And so by no means is this prediction of what the flow will be on July 1, but what it is showing you is that our average simulation is showing slightly higher flow than the historical average. And then those gray bars are showing the uncertainty around what the flow could be on any given day, given the variability in the data in the past. And so this figure on the right is kind of a useful way to visualize, is this going to be a pretty good year? Is it going to be a low year? And how does it compare to the past? So some caveats for streamflow forecast. These streamflow forecasting models is, like I mentioned, statistical models can explain previous streamflow volumes really well using historical conditions. But if the conditions that we see this year or the next year are outside of our historical observations, the models might not perform as well. The other thing that's really important is that we do not explicitly incorporate summer precipitation or irrigation practices in the basin. And so if, say, this was a low water year and there were folks in the basin that decided to curtail their water use voluntarily or change their irrigation practices, that would not get incorporated into the prediction of the model. And so we have to be careful about how we interpret model output when things are actively changing in the basin in response to the forecasted stream flows. And I'd be happy to talk about that some more as well. So then a couple of other things that we're working on that I want to talk about, and then I'll show you the interface, is one, we are going to be doing a hydrograph recession analysis. And so what this is it gives us an analysis of the rate at which stream flow goes from its peak flow and returns to a base flow. And the reason why we're doing this is that this is an additional way to understand the behavior of the watershed and late season water availability. And so once we hit peak flow, how quickly are we going to get to base flow? What's the rate at which we can expect things to change? And so our initial modeling on this is looking pretty good. We can still do some modifications. This is still in the works because we've really been focused on our winter model predictions the past couple of months, and we won't be able to implement this hydrograph recession until, once the peak has passed. And so we're going to be digging into this more in the next month or so now that we have everything up and running online. And then, and we're still exploring this right now, but it is something that folks in the Valley were interested in getting more information about, getting more granular, more detail once the season starts. And so we're going to just keep on working on that. And then this is the part that we are really excited about. There's a lot going on in this figure, so I'm going to walk you through it. But effectively, what we've done here is the three different lines shown on this plot are the middle line is showing the average prediction from Bigwood at Haley from the simulated forecast, just kind of like I showed on that Silver Creek model. The bottom line is showing our low flow, like our expected lowest flow. And then the top line is kind of our expected highest flow that could come through the system. And then each of the dots is showing a water right year and month year. And so what you could use this figure to do is to say, all right, if I had a water right of that came from May 1896, which is kind of this light blue, then I can come over on this figure and trace that my curtailment date based on the mean flow would be somewhere around the end of June or early August, if the flows are average. And as the season progresses, if it turns out there's even less water than we thought, then my curtailment date could be even earlier. And you'll see here that we have colored dots that are way early in the season before people are irrigating. And so this is also a component of the project that we're still refining right now. So making sure that it's only showing water right curtailments once water rights would actually get curtailed. And we got some great feedback from our last stakeholder meeting talking about how we could make this visualization in particular interactive once it's online, so people could, scroll over one of these points and see what date it is. The other thing that we've talked about that we're going to need to spend some time on is if there's any way, we're going to think about how we can group different dates together. So if there are, for example, if there's only one water right in May of 1883, then can we group spring 1883 together, or which ones do we need to disaggregate because there's really big water rights in there. So we're thinking about how we're going to group these to make this visualization even easier to read and easier to interpret. And really importantly, both this figure and any of the other figures that I've shown you on the website, they have descriptions on there, and we're going to be refining those to make sure that if you have forgotten this presentation and you are coming back to the website later, that there's resources to help you interpret any information that's on there. So those are kind of all the outputs of the modeling component. And then the other thing that was real important for us was to deal with the problem that data has historically been in many places that we need to use to inform how much water is in the system. So the solution is a centralized database. So Sam developed a centralized database for this project. It is made everything substantially faster, a lot easier to navigate and access. And then the other component is that many of us, myself included, have to navigate a ton of different websites to gather information about water resources in a given basin for the year. So our goal is to provide our daily model output figures and tables in one website that also efficiently can link you to other resources about a given basin of interest. So what does it look like? Here is our landing page, and I'm gonna click on this and bring us over to the actual page. So this is just, classic splash page on the front end. And then here we click over to the Streamflow forecast. The thing that's really great about this is that the model gets run every single morning. And so you can see up here that this is our Streamflow forecast as of today. And then here in this table, we have exceedance probabilities. And so this 50% is our average flow. Visualization on this is something that we have also talked about with the stakeholders about just making that mean value really clear, thinking about how we might reproduce the NRCS visualization to show the data in a way that folks are familiar with. But the point being here is that we have our mean predicted flow right in the middle, and then we have our less likely flow is kind of the 75 percentile passing, and then inverse, we have like a 10% chance of passing these other flows. And so you can see these for each of the different sites in the basin. And then we also have on our main landing page for the project, we have links over to the Northwest River Forecasting Center's outputs and NRCS outputs as well. And those will all be linked in our primary page here once we keep refining some of from the output. So I know that I only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to kind of just blow through a couple of things and just show you the latest and greatest. We've done some stream temperature modeling in Silver Creek, and what this has looked like, I'm just going to skip right to the good stuff. So there are stream temperature measurements at 59 different locations across Silver Creek network, largely in thanks to the Silver Creek Alliance and the Ecosystem Science Foundation team. And Sam created this really cool model that I'm not going to tell you the details about, but the point being here is that the model explains about 3/4 of the variation in stream temperatures across all of those measurements. And when we look at that model, what you can do is you can take this slider out to some date in the future. So let's say we're concerned about August stream temperatures. I can press this forecast stream temperatures button, and what it does is when I pick this date, it picks the average temperature for that date, and then it pulls the average stream flow on that date from the historical conditions. Once we have these two models linked, it'll take the predicted stream flow in Silver Creek from the model, and then it shows this really cool map of stream temperature all across the network. And then the other thing that's really cool is that you can see right now we're predicting this output with 100 CFS. Let's say stream flow dropped to 81 CFS, which is substantially lower, and we forecast it again. Let's give it a minute. Now you can see that some of the network is quite a bit darker. And our goal here is to be able to highlight when stream temperatures get to a point that they are too high or not great for fish. And so it can kind of help identify when there are like critical thresholds in the system that should be considered given our management practices. And so some of these tools, like I mentioned, they're still refining. Like we're going to clean up some of the text on here to make things a little bit easier to see. There's also a Data Explorer tab where you can select variables. So folks that really want to dig into things, they have access to that entire database that has developed all of these forecasts. And then with that, I'll just let you know some next steps and hopefully leave a little bit of time for questions. Like I mentioned throughout, we are continuing to update the online interface with input from folks in the Valley. We're going to work on that recession analysis, and then Sam is going to be working on a dissolved oxygen model, which is the next step from the temperature model. And you can look for project updates at our website here. It's boisestate.edu/ready/Wood River. And that has links to the dashboard. It has links to all of the other forecasts in the basin, and it has our contact information as well. So I will stop share and leave just a few minutes for questions now at the end.
That was fascinating. Thank you very, very much. Do we have any questions? Raise your hand or come off mute. As this is being implemented, have you seen folks, how are they using this information? How are folks using it in the Valley for farming decisions, or I guess what are they using it for? How are they using it?
Yeah, the real goal that they had asked for when I first started working in the basin is that they wanted decent understanding of stream flow volumes for the season as early as mid-March so that they could consider what the planting decisions. So, is there going to be enough water for X number of cuttings of alfalfa? Should I not plant alfalfa this year? Should I plant something else? And that's the real goal of getting those forecasts early in the season. I think the other thing that's in consideration is that the Big Wood Groundwater Management Area Committee is considering adding these streamflow forecasts into the gamut of forecasts that would be considered in their management plan that they're working on with IDWR. And so having another forecasting data point to consider when they're making decisions about the upcoming irrigation season and if things need to be curtailed. So folks, I don't think have been actively using it already, largely because it's a good water year, so they didn't need it this year. But that is the goal of having it online, is so that they can make those decisions, particularly in low water years.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Kendra, thank you. Very fascinating. Appreciate you and appreciate the work you do and your time today.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be here, and thanks folks for listening in. And like I said, if there's anybody else that's in a basin where there are tools that you need that you think could help improve your water management or help you with decision making, I would be excited to talk to you. And it could look something like over in the Big Wood, or it could look like something completely different dependent on your needs. And I'm all ears to hear what folks are interested in out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you folks for joining us today for this H2-Know. Like I say, we've recorded it, we'll upload it and send it out as part of the update email next week. Our next H2-Know is going to be at the end of June, kind of in prep for the beginning of July, which is when legislation that was passed this year goes into effect, and we have a couple that will impact some of our members, so we'll be talking about that at the end of June. So thank you again for joining us, and with that, we will sign off.